And now as we continue our program, I have a word for you as you think about what you may wish to respond to the message today. Please use the page so that you can write down your questions, and when the time comes, you will have an opportunity to respond. But we are so fortunate to have with us Dr. Robert Taylor, MD, and he will be able to present to us something that we have perhaps never heard before, and we will be educated. And so, Bob, it is a pleasure to have you with us, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Andy, and good morning, students of medical history. Glad to have you here today. My grandfather died about age 35. I never knew him. He died of a hand infection that went into blood poisoning and killed him. And that could today be cured with about 50 cents worth of penicillin. A lot of us wouldn't be here today if it weren't for the medicines we're going to talk about today. So let's go on and talk about some medicines that changed our lives. I'm going to warn you for your sensitivities here. There will be some pictures of diseases. We will discuss some social diseases. So at the appropriate time, if you would be offended, you may cover your ears. Here are the medicines we're going to talk about. There could be others, but these are the ones I chose to discuss, and I've got them in more or less chronological order when they came upon us. And curiously, I want you to think about, as we go through these, how many of these you have taken, and you may be surprised at the end how many you have. Let's start with opium. Can we turn the house lights down a little bit? Somebody grab Andy and ask him to turn the house lights down a little. We'll start with opium, that beautiful opium poppy flower there. The opium comes from the latex of the opium poppy, and it gives us three familiar. Do you know how to turn Henry, do you know how to turn the house lights down? You definitely can see the slides better with them down. It comes from the opium poppy, three familiar drugs, morphine, codeine, and heroin. It's a very, very valuable product. Look at what 1 kilogram of opium is worth. $16,000 retail, 1 kilo. What is our chief source of opium? Where does most of the opium in the world come from? Anybody guess? I think most of you are right. It's Afghanistan, that little rocky country where rich nations go to become bankrupt. Now, it's been around a long time. In biblical times, the Sumerians called it the joy plant. It was part of the poison hemlock. And we don't know for sure, but it's very possible that Socrates, who took hemlock, also got some opium along with that hemlock. It was used as an anesthetic, in the year 1500 before Christ. So it's been around a long time. It became a very popular drug, one of the first recreational drugs in the 1800s. It was called laudanum, and we can find it in the writings. We know it was used by lots and lots of very famous people, particularly the poets there were so many of at that time, Byron and Shelley and Keats, Edgar Allan Poe. But so what is laudanum? What's laudanum? It's opium in alcohol. And it's still around. It's been flavored over the years with all sorts of different things. Cinnamon is one. But there have been different flavorings, but it's opium in a strong solution of alcohol that's varied from time to time. Used by Dr. Arthur Conan Doyle and by his character Sherlock Holmes. Now, as an aside in medical history, because I know you're students, Arthur Conan Doyle was a physician, and he was in practice, and his practice really wasn't taking off. It wasn't very busy. I don't know if he wasn't a good doctor, but it wasn't very busy. So to fill his time, he started writing. And he started writing about this fictional character, Sherlock Holmes, that he patterned after his medical school professor, who was very good at making diagnosis from small cues. But that's an aside. Also in the 1800s, lots of opium dens. Look at that waste of humanity there, just lying there smoking opium, and most were operated by the Chinese. Now, from opium, we got heroin. Right at the end of the century there, the Bayer Pharmaceutical Company developed heroin. They marketed it strongly as a cough medicine and a non-addictive painkiller. Now, it is a very, very good cough medicine, and a derivative, as we'll see here, is still used today. It is probably the best painkiller we have, but there's a small problem. Where's the word heroin come from? Anybody know? The first subjects, and these were Bayer Company employees, they tested it out on their employees. So they took this drug, and they said it made them feel heroic. So it's true. So we'll call the drug heroin. That's where the word came from. A small problem. It is highly, highly addictive, and only 15 years later, in 1913, Bayer ceased production of heroin. In the 1914 Harrison Narcotic Act made its use illegal here in the United States. It's still around, of course. Codeine, another derivative of the opium poppy. Very popular for cough, and it's also used for pain. If you take it for pain, and we'll see here, it can slow the bowels and can constipate you. But for cough, elixir, terpene, hydrate, and codeine. Is that familiar to anybody in this room?
Absolutely.
And what did we call it in World War II? Oh, you're all young. GI gin. And it was a very popular product among our soldiers, some of whom, would you believe, consumed it when they didn't even have a cold. And then there's Paregoric. Paregoric is still around, still in the pharmacopoeia, still prescribed by physicians. It is tincture of opium, and anything that says tincture is really an alcohol solution. So it's an alcohol solution of opium, and what did we say an alcohol solution of opium is? It's called laudanum. But it's not called that today. It's got various odd flavoring items in it, but basically it's a solution of opium in alcohol. And if you can look here, because I can see it, it says this is 46% alcohol. Okay, that's about 100 proof. That is really a lot of alcohol. Now, it was marketed for colic in babies. So you see the picture of the cute little baby here, and for colic, if the baby is 5 days old with colic, you give them 5 drops. 2 weeks old, you give them, I think that's 6 drops. And it's still used today. I have prescribed Paregoric occasionally, early in my practice, because it's a wonderful drug for somebody who has diarrhea and nothing else is working. It will stop the diarrhea. It's some 20 drops of Paregoric, some water, and it's a very good drug for severe diarrhea. Let's talk about mercury. Mercury is kind of unique among the metals because it flows. It's a liquid at room temperature. You can see the mercury in his hand, flowing into the beaker here. And that it gave it its name. It's a metal that moves, and it's also called quicksilver. Quick, not because rapid, but in maybe the biblical context, the quick in the dead, as in moving, living. And it's silver in color, so it's called quicksilver. It's named for the winged Greek god Mercury, who was also the messenger. He's always seen with a lot of wings on. And again, as an aside here, you see what he's holding. He's holding his staff. That's the caduceus. That is the symbol of Mercury, the messenger, patron saint of, the patron god of a lot of odd people, including thieves. The caduceus has become mixed up with the legitimate symbol of medicine, which is the staff of Aesculapius. The staff of Aesculapius is a single staff with a single snake, no wings. But this has become mixed up with, and when you go to a lot of hospitals, you'll see the caduceus on the board there as the symbol of their hospital. But it's not a medical symbol at all. Mercury was the earliest treatment for syphilis, going back to medieval times. There was a saying at that time, spend an evening with Venus and a lifetime with Mercury. It's a poison. It poisons the brain, it poisons the kidneys, it poisons other parts of the body, and it was a highly toxic substance, so the range of what you could take there was very narrow. It was eventually replaced in 1910 by a drug called salvarsan that was developed after extensive research by a fellow named Paul Ehrlich. Now, what was salvarsan that replaced mercury? It was an arsenical. So you stopped taking mercury and they switched over to taking an arsenic drug. It also had a very narrow margin of safety, and eventually penicillin came in and replaced both of them. But it was widely used for a lot of different purposes. It was a very, very good remedy for constipation. And it was the main ingredient in a drug called thunderclappers, also called Dr. Rush's bilious pills. Now, who was Dr. Rush? Dr. Benjamin Rush was America's most famous physician at the time of the Revolution. He was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. He was part of the Constitutional Convention. He was a strong champion of bleeding and purging. That got him in some trouble. But he designed Dr. Rush's bilious pills, and they spent, Lewis and Clark, on their trip west to Oregon, spent a good deal of their allotted money on buying thunderclappers. Now, why did they do that? Because they were going to spend most of their journey on boats. And as they went upriver on boats, and then when they got over the Rockies, downriver on boats, they sent hunters walking the shores on each side to hunt game. So they knew they were going to be eating, pretty much no fruits or vegetables. They were going to be eating just meat. And that was going to be constipating, and they anticipated this and brought a lot of strong laxative, the thunderclappers, along with them. As you trace the route from Missouri up over to Oregon, where they camped, they can still find mercury in the soil. Not enough to cause anybody any trouble, but it's there. It's still in the soil in their areas of encampment. All right. Mercury's in dental fillings. I'll bet most of us in this room who still have our teeth have some. It's an ingredient in mascara, and it is a diuretic. Now, it's not used as a diuretic anymore, but in my early years in practice, in the late 60s, before we had Lasix and all these good diuretics we have now, when someone had a lot of fluid retained, they were at heart failure, we would give an injection of 2 cc's of mercury hydrate. Mercury hydrate was a mercury compound. It poisoned the kidneys just enough that they got rid of a lot of fluid, and it was a very effective diuretic at that time. Still around, it's in mercurochrome. Some diaper rash ointments, eye drops, stimulant laxatives, and traditional Chinese medicines. A number of them have mercury in. Today, thimerosal is in flu vaccines. Oh ho! So if you got a flu vaccine from a multiple dose vial, it had mercury in it as a preservative. If your vaccine comes from a single dose vial or a preloaded syringe, it doesn't have it. So, but if you've got a multiple dose vial, which a lot of doctors use in their offices, it's got a little mercury in it. Won't hurt you, probably. Probably. Minamata disease. This is from Japan. In the Minamata Bay in Japan, had a factory that dumped tons of mercury waste into the bay. The shellfish and the fish consumed this refuse in the bay, and so the shellfish in that bay had a very high content of mercury. The bigger the fish, the older the fish, the more mercury in the fish. And the people there in this town of Minamata developed neurologic disease. You can see that this person is highly retarded. The hand is all curled up. And it was called Minamata disease from this factory in Japan. Okay, I'm going to take you to digitalis. Digitalis, it's a heart drug. And that's pretty much the one thing it does, at least it does pretty well. It's an old drug. The two things it does, it strengthens the contraction of your heart. So if your heart is kind of beating weakly, it will make it stronger. And it slows the rate of the heart. You give it enough, you can slow it way down. It was used originally, classically, to treat dropsy. What's dropsy? Edema. Dropsy is an edema. It's fluid in the tissues, usually in the legs. Why in the legs? Because it goes down with gravity. If you're lying in bed, your edema moves up, as you straighten your legs out, and goes down to the lowest point, which is your buttocks. When you're up and around, it's in your legs. It's common in heart failure, because heart failure, your heart's not pushing enough blood around, and so it backs up in the veins and then goes out of the vein, it goes out of the veins and out of the lymphatics, and is out in the tissues. And it looks like that. These are somebody's feet with a lot of edema, because that's the lowest point. And if you can see the little depressions here, that's where the doctor's pushed in his thumb to see if it's really edema. Because if it's fat, you push your thumb in, you take the thumb away, it pops right out. If it's fluid, you push your thumb in, and it stays with this sort of depression. So this person has edema and not simply fat angles. So where did it come from? It goes back to the 1700s. A Dr. William Withering, country doctor in Shropshire, England, had heard about this remedy from this herbal woman who did herbal remedies in his hometown. And she said she had this remedy that could help treat dropsy. So he thought this might be interesting, and so he went and interviewed her, found out her secret. It came from the foxglove plant. Now this is very common, it's a weed. It's a very common plant. And it came from the foxglove plant. The foxglove, you see, it looks like a glove that you might put on a finger. You can see this here. And he wrote a paper called An Account of the Foxglove. So much of what we know that we can attribute to individuals is because they wrote about it. Digitalis is available today. It used to be digitalis leaf. When I worked at the Public Health Service Hospital over in Hampton Boulevard, I would prescribe digitalis leaf 100 milligrams to be taken one a day. It, like so many other drugs, had some side effects. We're going to talk about one of them here. It's kind of fun. But it was a very inexpensive drug. And we don't use digitalis leaf anymore. It has now been purified. So instead of 100 milligrams, you're taking 0.125 milligrams, if you look at the bottle there, and that's the dose. It's still a very useful drug. The brand you hear most about is Lanoxin. Still a very useful drug for heart failure. Now here's the fun side effect. Let's go to Vincent van Gogh. He used yellow in his paintings a lot. And I just picked some of them out here. This one here on the left is his hometown. Anita and I were there about a year and a half ago on a trip up the Seine River from Paris to Normandy, and we stopped in the hometown. I walked by those buildings. But these are just a selection of his paintings to show how much yellow he used. Yellow vision can be a side effect of digitalis overdose. It's called hemeropia, which is kind of a technical name, but it's yellow vision. Things look yellow. So why was Van Gogh taking all of this? Well, we're going to see. Here, while we were at this town, we took a hike up to the field, and on the way, this is on the way up to where his tomb is. And at this Auvers, which is the town, they have paintings of Van Gogh in this, right there at the site where it was originally painted. Now, it's not yellow there, and it might have been yellow at that time, or maybe he added the yellow, but that painting was painted here. Here's one of his most famous paintings. It's called Starry Night. What people that have digitalis overdose really get is they get yellow halos around things. And if you notice the yellow halos around the stars there in Starry Night. I had to show you that. That's us there sitting by a statue of, they call him Vincent there, kind of tired from hiking that day. And here's where it came from. His physician, Dr. Gachet, of which he's painted 3 different paintings, and in this one, you can see Dr. Gachet, and right there in the middle of the circle is a foxglove plant, just to make sure you don't miss it. Gachet was Van Gogh had epilepsy and a lot of emotional problems too, but he had epilepsy, and at that time they used digitalis for a number of different things because we had very few drugs that did anything then. So they used what they had for everything, and they used digitalis to treat epilepsy, and Gachet was treating Van Gogh's epilepsy with digitalis, for which Van Gogh was very happy. Now it's used to slow the heart. If you have atrial fibrillation, your doctor might prescribe some digitalis to slow things down if you've got a rapid rate, or if you have heart failure. Quinine, used to treat malaria, right? Comes from this cinchona tree. It's indigenous to South America, Peru and Bolivia and those countries. Here's what it looks like, and there's what the bark looks like, because it is really mostly from the bark of that tree. When the Jesuits went to South America to Christianize the heathens in South America, among other things, they came across this bark. The Cuenca people there used it as a muscle relaxant, I think probably for other purposes, and the Jesuits brought it back to Europe. It was called, in Europe then at that time, was called Jesuits' bark. Now, malaria was widespread in those days. We had malaria in the Mississippi Valley, we had malaria in Philadelphia. The malaria was common in southern Europe, and it was used to treat malaria in the 17th century. When we found out that malaria, the cause of malaria, it was very important in building the Panama Canal. You know, the French had made an abortive effort to build the Panama Canal. As they made that first effort, they were attacked by biting ants, big ants, that would come into their tents or come in where they were and bite them. And so the French did the only sensible thing. They built water-filled moats around where they lived. Now these water-filled moats made wonderful breeding grounds for mosquitoes, and the malaria got worse and worse, and finally drove them out. As the French were driven out, they left the moats behind, so they had really made the mosquito problem worse. When we found out that quinine can prevent malaria, the Americans went in, drained the swamp, to use a common metaphor, and they provided quinine for the workers there. They would have bowls of quinine on the tables in the dining halls, you know, with the dormitories where people were living, and they estimate that, you know, half the workers there would take a quinine pill every day, and that helped keep the malaria away. So a similar thing happened when Britain conquered India. The soldiers in India, during the Raj, they were required to take quinine daily. Of course, they were soldiers, you could make them do it. The soldiers didn't like the quinine. Why didn't they like the quinine? Very, very bitter taste. What could you do to mask that taste? Gin. Add some gin. And this is where we get gin and tonic. So the tonic water is supposed to tone your body. Well, it doesn't really. It was to mask the taste of the quinine. Tonic water still has quinine in it. There is well, I'll tell you in a second. More modern uses. There was, in the 1940s, you get bromoquinine cold tablets. Caffeine, which is added to a lot of different generic compounds, acetaminophen is Tylenol, and quinine. Quinine is a very effective treatment for